When you drive 40 minutes out of Launceston towards the mountains you can see in the distance, the Liffey Valley is right under the nearest and the highest mountain to the west, which is Titicatica or Dry's Bluff. And when you get into that valley, the world changes. This forest is of course ancient eucalypt forest, and the trees get shorter the further you get away from the river until you get into the alpine eucalypts right up on top of the bluff. It's woodlands, it's a diversity of eucalypts, but under that is the musk trees, the dogwoods, and it's full of wildlife, both night and in the daytime. This is the Liffey River, and that's the name of the river that flows through Dublin in Ireland. But for thousands of years before that, it was called the Telefanga. The difference between the Liffey here and the one in Dublin is the one in Dublin looks like Guinness. This one's as clear as a crystal. I drove up here in 1982 to look at the beautiful Liffey Falls, and I bought Oura Oura for $8,000. All the wildlife, the river, the mountain track, the forests, the meadows, the seasons, the brilliant stars above, all for $8,000. Being here gave me a great friendship with this country, with this land, with this beautiful planet in fact. So it was extraordinarily inspiring to me. We're on a planet that's in an environmental disaster of our own making. And to understand that, I think people need to be acquainted with nature. And I don't think there's any better place in the world than Oura Oura.
Welcome everybody to Bush Heritage's webinar Place of Inspiration on Oura Oura. I'm Heather Campbell, the CEO, and I know many of you have seen me on webinars over the past few months. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and I recognise that we're from all over Australia and there's a number of people dialing in from overseas. I'd like to start by paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people, the people of the Kulin Nation here on the edge of Melbourne, on the edge of the Yarra Valley, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And this is where I'm sitting. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Tasmanian people, the people whose land Oura Oura sits on and that we work really closely with, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. What'd be really great if all of you that are on the call could actually share where you're currently sitting and the First Nations of the people where you are sitting, whether it be in Australia or somewhere else around the globe. The easiest way to do this is through the chat function. Now, I'm sure you're probably all super used to Zoom by now, but if you have a look at the little chat function, and if you can send it to all panelists and attendees, then everybody will be able to see the land on which you're sitting upon. And if it comes up in front of me, then I'll share some of those too, so that you can get that sense of where everybody is from. But I know we have people from pretty well every state of Australia, and I also know we have some others from overseas. So I can see now that we've got people from, again, from my part of the world, from Wurundjeri country, from Noongar country around Perth, from Albany, the Sunshine Coast. It's great to see people sharing where they're from. So please keep doing that, and I'll just share a few more. So we've Buddy Maya country, Jagera country that people are coming from, Gadigal country. So it's great to see that everybody's coming from different parts of Australia, and each of those parts have their own sense of inspiration and those special parts where people can immerse themselves in nature, which is really, really important. Tonight we're going to hear from Bob and some of his stories. We're also going to hear from Jody, who is our Executive Manager from the Southeast, and our plans in relationship to Oura Oura. But we're going to start with a little bit of a video. But before we do that, just a little bit of the housekeeping things as such. We have Anna and Karen in the background. So if you have any connectivity issues or any challenges like that, then please utilize the chat function and they'll be able to help you out. In relationship to questions and answers, we really do want questions. So can you please make sure that, as you think of them, type them into the Q&A little box. That will be then shared with me. And once we've gone through the formal presentations, then we'll have lots of, sharing of stories and answering those questions. And any of us on the panel here will be able to help in that regard. If for some reason too you also completely lose connectivity, then the email address to use to get in touch with Anna to help you out is events@bushheritage.org.au. So that's the main sort of housekeeping things, but the key thing is when you think of questions, please type them in so that we can then actually answer those when we get to them. Now I'd like to introduce just another short little video so that we can share some more inspiration about Oura Oura before I introduce Bob and he shares his story. So we just might go to the next video if we can.
G'day and welcome to Oura Oura. It's springtime here and I just love it. The river's running clear and all over the falls up further and down through the valley. The forests have got a sparkle, the wattles and the sassafras are flowering. And here's the garden, Elizabeth Crack. It was ploughed in the 1940s, but it keeps going with all these beautiful Northern Hemispheric spring bulbs in front of this now heritage classified wooden farmhouse. I hope you can come here one day. This place has given me inspiration, comfort, courage when I needed it, from the Franklin campaign, indeed from the Lake Pedder campaign, through all the forest controversies in Tasmania, to the establishment of bush heritage in 1990 right here, when blocks up the river and down the river which were due for clear felling were saved by the generosity of people getting together and putting money in to buy the land. The wildlife, the white goshawks, the wedge-tailed eagles, the spot-tailed quolls, the echidnas, the wombats, the wallabies, the beautiful faced bettongs, all safe because people have joined to make places like this safe in Bush Heritage's hands right around Australia. This is a great place to be. Come and see it if you can. There's a welcome sign, trespassers welcome, still on the gate, and that includes you. Come on down to Oura Oura.
Thank you so much for that invitation. And Bob, thank you so much for sharing those visuals of a spring, because the rest of us were unfortunately couldn't get down, courtesy of the joys of COVID. And it's great to know that it's in such good hands down there, and we're all looking forward to coming down. I'd also just like to take this opportunity to welcome everybody that's online. We've got people, as I said, from all over Australia, and we've got people that were part of the original journey for Bush Heritage. So people like Judy that were here when it all started. And so it is great to welcome those that have been here for our whole journey from the start of Oura Oura and the discussions that occurred under the walnut tree. I'd now like to introduce Bob, but it's a bit hard to introduce Bob because sort of everybody knows Bob. And Bob's, can be seen as an activist, a politician, a doctor, a lover of nature. For me, what is really special and what I love about Bob, and I just want to share a little story, is this time last year, myself and my then 13-year-old daughter went down to Tassie, and we spent an evening with Paul and Bob at Oura Oura, and to just see the magic come alive for my daughter Izzy, and to see her and Bob wander down to the river looking for platypus, and for her to learn from somebody and get that sense of magic and the importance of inspiration. So she's off playing cricket tonight, but she is annoying me saying, when's the border going to open? When can I get back down there? So for me, that's a really special connection to see how Bob is able to light up the eyes of the next generation that are coming through, so that we have those amazing kids that will grow into adults and will continue the work that many started a number of decades ago. So without further ado, over to you, Bob.
Well, thank you, Heather, and thank you, Kieran and Anna and Jody, for making this possible. I'd just really like to begin by reiterating that invitation to folk to come and visit Oura Oura. Very easy to do because it's just 45 minutes out of Launceston. The road's sealed all the way. There's a good car parking spot. We don't have disabled people's access yet, but that's coming. And there's a nice little bridge over the river. And Izzy and I, Heather's daughter, when we went down to look for the platypus, didn't spot one, but I did the other night. And a little bit later on, I'll share that with you. As news just this week from New South Wales is that we really are moving towards putting platypuses, of all things, on the vulnerable to extinction list as their rivers get walloped by a whole range of impacts from the press of people consuming more on a planet that's got not much more to give. I was wondering about things just like that, and I was recently contacted by a fellow who's brought out a book on Jimi Hendrix, and I'd just come back from London, where I was at the hospital when 27-year-old Jimi Hendrix was brought in dead after an overdose. And he made me think, because that guy said in one sentence, in the long run, we are our children. And when you think about that, the extraordinary responsibility that's on our shoulders to make sure that we look after ourselves, because our children are ourselves, he was meaning the generations going down the line are just sentient human beings like us, wanting all the same things as us. In fact, they are us in a different form. So we have to look after them and their interests. And that, of course, means looking after the planet, because we all come from the wild planet. We're shaped by wildness. We're shaped, our bodies, our minds, our spirit relates to this wild planet Earth. And as I like to say, that's why we give each other a bunch of flowers as an act of love rather than a chainsaw. That's why we put pictures on the wall so often. That's why we like the children to be watching Edinburgh. What is it? Well, we don't know, but Swedish doctors are now prescribing, they can by law, instead of Valium, a 15-minute walk in the forest daily for people who are highly anxious. And I realised after going down the Franklin River in 1976, I said on the video that I went to Oura Oura in 1982. It was actually 1973. And from there I went down the Franklin River and realised as a doctor what importance there is in having nature as part of our lives. And in particular for kids, it's so important that, like music, they be introduced to it very early, because if they don't, they won't understand it further down the line. They won't appreciate it further down the line. And Oura Oura is just the place to take children. It's got open paddocks. It's got forests at the back, but they're eminently walkable forests. It's got that beautiful little stream, just perfect for kids to play in. There's a swimming hole under the bridge where the platypus pops up every now and then. And I was up there 2 days ago visiting an old friend who's in a nursing home in Westbury, and here's the echidna wandering across the paddock. And at night, the thump of those wallabies, which woke Izzy up when she was camped there, as they move around with the barred-tailed bandicoots. And Mike Brett's our new Bush Heritage ranger, if you like, guardian, looker after her, had a camera there during the week, and there's Tasmanian devils, as well as a Bassian thrush wandering at night through the bottom of the forest. And I can tell from walking over the bridge the other day, the spot-tailed quolls are still very active at night as well.
And that mountain up the back, Tika, it's got caves lined along, and in the middle of those, the sandstone abutments, is a white spot. And I point that out to people from home at Oura Oura because that's the guano from a peregrine falcon's nest. These are the fastest birds, in fact, the fastest creatures on the planet, and they're in an inaccessible spot up there, but they've been there for many, many years, and I have no doubt they'll be there for many decades to come. But at that same spot were the original Palawa people of Tasmania during the last ice age, and there's still little implements and signs of their being there. And of course, they came and went after the ice age onto the plateau in summer, where the cytogums, which are headed for extinction as well, were such a marvellous thing for their enjoyment. These are eucalypts, which, a bit like the Canadian source of wonder, leak sap, and it's very sweet. And if it's left a little while, it becomes fermented. So I'm sure there was marvellous corroborees over the millennia with the cytogums in an age when people weren't impacting on the environment to the detriment of such marvellous things. The walk up the bluff, there were 3 cars in the parking lot the other day. People actually run up the bluff. It's 3 Empire State Buildings to the top. And it's a great walk because you go through all Judy Henderson, my lifelong friend, who's visited Liffey so many times, particularly when she was here living in Hobart. Judy, you'll know about that walk. And one time when I walked up over the top and way beyond across the plateau and thought I'll hitch back home the next day, and the first car that came along the road was you. I remember that, picked me up, and we went back and spent a very pleasant evening at Oura Oura. There's so much there for everybody, for a day visit, up to the beautiful Liffey Falls, and into the forests, into those ferneries. That fern that Paul and I was looking at on that short clip, there's only 3 or 4 of those in Tasmania, and one is in that forest at the back of Oura Oura, and we don't know why. It's been there presumably for hundreds of years. How did it get there? Who put it there? Was it a bird? Was it some indigenous passerby? We don't know. That's part of the wonder of the place. So it's a place of inspiration. It's given me, as I said in that short clip, not just courage, but intellectual stimulation. That's where I've produced the books I have on Lake Pedder, on the Franklin River during that campaign, on the forests, and on the philosophy of the environment, which is so important for us to be thinking about, because as we do to this planet's wild environment, we ultimately do to ourselves, to reframe Jimi Hendrix's wonderful words. So there we go. And I'm very, very grateful to Bush Heritage, to you, Heather, to you, Jody, who we're just about to hear from, to Mike Bretts, who's looking after the place wonderfully. He comes and goes. He's got other responsibilities in Tasmania as well. But to the whole panoply of Bush Heritage people who've now put in storyboards. There's a nice little shelter shed there. The toilets are coming next, as we'll hear. And I just want people to get some of the enjoyment, some of the uplift, some of the creativity, some of the inspiration and adventure that this wonderful little place, which never belonged to me, it was always part of the Commons, but I was lucky enough to be there for 40 or 50 years. Some of that inspiration onto others. It'll be different. There's a walking track about to go in along the river. It'll be different, but you can't go there without, and a lady from Perth who was there last summer just said, it's the most beautiful place I've been into in any place in the world. Well, thank you, madam, because I sometimes wonder if I overstated, but she was saying what I think about Oura Oura in the hands of bush heritage, a place of inspiration and a gate that's open and welcoming to everybody watching this and everybody else as well. It's going to bring great pleasure to many people in the years ahead. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks a lot, Bob, and thank you for those, visions of the different landscapes at Oura Oura, the different animals, the different birds. I can certainly reflect on the fact of, the wallabies thumping around and the noise they make, but just to be able to immerse self in that environment is really special. And for me, when I started at Bush Heritage as the new CEO, the first reserve I went to was Aurora. And to start there and to be able to start my thinking from there was a real privilege. So thank you, Bob, for letting us be the looker after us of that magical place. We're now going to go to Jody. So as I said, Jody Gunn is our executive manager for the Southeast. So she has responsibilities for Tasmania, Victoria, and New South Wales. And Jody's going to share with you some of the things that we're currently doing through the Liffey and also the plans that we've got underway. So, Jody, look forward to hearing the plans.
Thanks very much, Heather. I'm also going to share a bit of a slideshow with you just so that I can help you to see, visualise the plans that we have ahead and to just give you a bit of background on what we've been observing of late. So hopefully you can all see that clearly. I always include a map at the beginning of presentations just to help orient you, particularly for those who might be joining us from far and wide. I can see there's people on the line who are coming all the way from Perth and other locations. So hopefully this map will orient you to where we're talking about you today if you aren't already. So the map on the top right-hand corner shows the reserves in the context of Tasmania, and in particular the context to Launceston, as Bob described. Thank you, Bob. It's not very far away from Launceston at all, just a short drive down the road, really. You can see there that there are 4 blocks for Bush Heritage Australia that we steward into the future. And Oura Oura that we're talking about today is one of those. It is, as you can see, also right on the edge, and some of the properties are contained within the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. And as Bob has mentioned, the amazing Tatajitika Dryers Bluff is the escarpment to the south. I was last there with my family just in January and spent time with some of the staff, with Bob and Paul earlier this year. And I've not been able to get back there either. Heather, we're all pining for being able to leave Melbourne as soon as we can. But working on this presentation for you all today has made me feel a little bit like I'm back there right now, dipping my fingers in the river by the bridge. 4 reserves are here protecting important cultural and natural values that make up part of the larger World Heritage Area. And as Bob has so clearly articulated, these reserves provide a showcase for conservation and cultural values evolving together, and we're committed to ensuring that Oura Oura and Liffey River reserves remain a place of engagement and inspiration, as Bob has just described. This location has been a meeting place for much longer than our time and is the traditional country of the Northern Midlands tribe and a meeting junction between 3 tribal groups: Big River, Northern Midlands, and the Northern Tribes. It protects important natural and cultural values. Bob's described a range of them that he observes when he's out there, that Mike Bretts, our reserve manager, observes when he's out there, and that many of you as visitors have had the opportunity to see as you're walking around the properties. Many cultural stories and objects are also found here on these reserves, including up in the rocky outcrops where we've been lucky to walk with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community on country, reconnecting, sharing stories with them, and being lucky for them to share their stories with us. We protect habitats such as wet and dry sclerophyll forests, riparian and aquatic environments where, if you're lucky enough, you might see that platypus that Bob's described, and important threatened fauna like the Tasmanian wedge-tailed eagle, the spotted-tailed quoll, the eastern barred bandicoot, the goshawk, among so many others. When I was there with my young boys in January earlier this year, they were lucky enough to get up close and personal, possibly to that same echidna, Bob, that you were just describing. And I'd also like to share, Bob mentioned we've recently had some camera traps out, and Mike Brett's collected those cameras recently. These were installed in spring. These are images that show you that, you know, even right at this time, these amazing animals are using this incredible landscape today. Very exciting to have those photos, Bob. They just came through to me earlier, so really fantastic to see. The Liffey Valley reserves and the adjoining conservation properties are both naturally and culturally significant. The valley represents that interface between the World Heritage values and the high production zone agricultural lands. But perhaps some of the most significant opportunities that the Liffey reserves offer as the birthplace of Bush Heritage Australia is the potential for a nationally significant community engagement program. So to achieve this, we've developed a site plan, and largely due to the generosity of many of our supporters, some of you who are on the call today, we're now able to begin the implementation of this plan. I'll talk you through some of the plan in brief. Some of the images that you'll see are site drawings that are quite small. It's not the intention that you get into all of the detail, but that you understand that there are multiple pages, drawings, different elements of the plan that support and enable a range of engagement opportunities for visitors, volunteers and supporters. Bob Brown calls Oura Oura his place of inspiration, and we're developing a program for community engagement that inspires our volunteers, our visitors, and most importantly, I think, as Heather and I've both described, inspires a new generation to be passionate about the environment. There are 2 stages to be implemented, and we're currently in the process of implementing stage 1, that being low-key developments and interpretation, in keeping to the style of the reserve with a deliberate intention not to interrupt the natural setting and the vista. I'll go through to describe what that includes shortly, but it does include public toilets, upgrades to some of the existing infrastructure, signs and tracks. Stage 2, which we are hoping to begin next year, pending further fundraising, will include a caretaker's residence and workshop that will enable us to be much more actively present on the reserve all the time, and to enable caretakers to be there and to engage with visitors as they come through. And these next few slides will outline a bit more of what I've just described. What you can see here in this map is the existing car park. We'll be closing this car park off to the public. Bob, you said there was about 3 odd people, cars parked here the other day. This car park fills up very quickly. We'll be developing a new, larger, more easily accessible car park to the east of the block. We'll improve the gravel surfaces to the existing suspension bridge that you can see here, and create new walking tracks to connect to the bridge with the car park. The existing buildings will remain, and any new buildings will stick to the tenor of cultural heritage design elements. It's really important for this vista to remain as clear as it is. We're partway through upgrading the barn, which is, hopefully you should be able to see the picture at the top there. Bear with me, the slide clickers. Yep, thank you. My slide clicker seems to have disappeared. I'll just ask you to change the slides for me, please. So the top slide there is the existing barn. What we're doing is we're making some upgrades to that barn. We're opening it right up. We're putting in some windows, letting more light come in so that we can engage people in interpretation and storytelling around that barn. It'll also include a bit of a decking area out the front so that people can be both inside and outside. A new toilet has been designed. You can see here the architect designed toilet structure, and that will be installed shortly. It's amazing how many visitors we have coming through asking about toilets. So that will really help and support our visitors moving through the area. Next slide, please. The signs have been upgraded with improvements to the tracks as well to better facilitate the movement of people across the reserve, welcoming and informing them of key elements of the property. The signs tell a much deeper, stronger story, and low-key tracks will help support people to walk around the property and experience to its full extent. Next slide, please. The cottage is our centrepiece. That you can see here in the picture. It carries and holds the history. It tells so many stories. So we'll retain this and better communicate the stories that come from this area. The caretaker's residence that you can see on that map there on the right-hand side, the yellow building will retain this kind of low-key infrastructure and the existing heritage features, and it intends to be unobtrusive. Next slide, please. So as you've heard, for the longest history, Oura Oura has been a meeting place of people. It's been a place to share stories, to share dreams. As a location that was so integral to starting a significant environmental movement in Australia and bush heritage itself, we share Bob's vision that Oura Oura can remain a place for engagement and inspiration well into the future. So thank you. Next slide, please. We look forward to seeing opportunities like this, gathering like this, well into the future to engage with our supporters and our visitors, and look forward to sharing that with many of you when you come down next. Next slide, please. So thank you, Heather. That's all from me, but really look forward to any comments or questions that the panel might have.
Thank you, Jody. And as we get ready for questions, so please, people, type away. Love to see lots of questions. But we've heard a lot about platypus. And I understand, Bob, that you might have a little video that you might have taken recently of said platypus. So I'm wondering if you could just give us a bit of context of when that video was taken, and we might get the team to play it and share it.
Yeah, thank you. I said I'd show it, and so here's our opportunity. Just walking across the bridge about a week ago, and I always have a look for the platypus, and here it was feeding around the rocks in the middle of the day. So this little clip from my camera is the platypus at Oura Oura. You know, you can go for weeks and not see it, and then all of a sudden there's one or two. I've seen three there at once, and they're healthy. And there's no reason why the Liffey River can't be a stronghold, and Oura Oura a premium watching place for platypuses into the future. Great to go down there at night, by the way, when you're more likely to see it with a spotlight, because they're not concerned by light. Noise, bang, they'll dive straight away, but light doesn't bother them at all. So a good strong torch beam on the pool there at the bridge is very often rewarded with a picture of the platypus. Anyway, here she is, moving around the boulder. And it's just like a rocket underwater. There's a native water rat in there, Ricali as well, and but that platypus is just such a. Paul said, "How do I know it's a she?" Oh, well, I don't. But I picked up one that swam over my boot during a flood in July once, and took it up and put it in the bathtub, and that did have a spur. I had to be very careful. The males have a spur, and they can inflict a quite nasty injury. And good on them for that. I put it in the bathtub because there was a young biology student up on the mountain, and I thought he'd like to see it when he came back. But it was so thrashing about and so frightened that I took it back and put it in the river, and it kept on its way. So they're part and parcel of that part of the river and of Oura Oura. By the way, right when Bush Heritage was taking on the property in 2011, the willows, which were right choking the river, were removed. And what a great boon. And it's back in its natural state now and I'm sure that'll be a boon itself to the platypuses and the other native species that are in there.
Thanks for sharing that clip, and I can now tell Izzy that the platypus is real, that it's not just mythical. So thank you for that. We'd really like a whole lot of questions, please. So please use the question function. I'm sure you're thinking of some, so have them coming through. While we're pulling together, questions, I've got a couple that have come through that I wouldn't mind throwing at you, Bob. And this may sound slightly weird, but there is a non-Indigenous tree on that property that is very important, and it's got a bit of a lean to it these days. So I was just wondering if you could share with everybody a little bit about the walnut tree and the importance of that tree as far as being a bit of a gathering a place and the start of a lot of conservation work over the years.
Yes, it's the walnut tree that you can see to the left of the house in all the pictures. It did blow over in a windstorm. Paul and I were there when that happened, an absolute gale from the west. Oh, six years ago or so now, and we thought that'd be the end of it, but not on your life. It's just leaning on its elbow, and it's grown very well. It's got a nice crop of walnuts. Paul picks those between Christmas and New Year. Any later than that, and you've missed the boat. That's before the shell forms inside, and you get the husk, and then we have pickled walnuts to go with our cheese and bickies for the rest of the year. Or the walnuts themselves, if left to ripen, are mature and falling, ready to be picked as mature walnuts by Easter. The tree is a great shelter tree, and it was in summer a beautiful place to hold a little sit around and discussion, and that's where the Franklin River, a lot of Franklin River strategy, because Oura Oura is geographically in the centre of Tasmania, and people came from Hobart, Launceston, Burnie, Queenstown, and so on. A lot of strategy under that tree. It was also a lot of scratching of heads. A Liffey group was formed, which led to, one way or another, it was a stimulus for the establishment of the Australian Greens, which I went on to lead in the National Parliament when I was a senator. And of course, for the formation of bush heritage itself. And Judy, you'll remember how the house and the tree were very often pleasant discussion places, and there's been a lot of bush heritage picnics over the time in or under that tree. It's got a beautiful lawn underneath, and it's seen a lot. It was planted in about 1922. A 12-year-old, one of the eldest crack daughter, was down the road a couple of kilometres and saw a walnut under somebody else's tree with a little sprig, and she planted it, and it grew from that. And Paul's planted another one from this tree on the eastern side of the house, in case this one, we thought it might not survive the fall, but it's survived it very well. And yes, it's got a lot of stories to tell, and Bush Heritage has placed a beautiful storyboard in under the tree, talking about that history.
Thanks a lot, Bob. And I think every time I see that tree, it reminds me of the environmental and the conservation movement, that at times we can feel battered and bruised and sort of bent over in the wind or, hit in a storm, but that we keep going. And also that great, story you shared about it being, one of the 12-year-old girls who, planted it from that small little seedling. I'm sure she had no inkling of what it would actually generate. So one of the questions here from Michael is, Bob, when it's congratulations on the evolution of bush heritage, and he's asking, when you founded it, did you have a sense of the impact and what would we become, and also how much further do you think bush heritage can go in its influence?
Well, thanks, Michael. Yeah, look, a bit of an emergency in the valley, because a beautiful block upstream of Oura Oura, now called the Liffey River block, and another one up on the shoulder of the mountain called the Drysborough block, were coming up for sale. And each of those was over 100 hectares and was to be clear-felled for wood chips. And I'd just come back from getting a prize, an environmental prize, with $35,000 or $40,000 in my pocket from America, and I feel it didn't belong to me because it was about the Franklin River, which involved, of course, so many thousands of people ultimately in the campaign a few years earlier. And however, it was enough to put a deposit on the block. I got a friend to bid at auction. We got it for 250,000. I had the 40,000. Well, 210,000 to go. What to do about it? And again, Judy, you'll remember, with wonderful friends in Hobart, talking about taking up the American Land Conservancy model, which was then 20 years old, here in Australia, ultimately. But first of all, to see if we could raise the money. So we, people, including some who are listening tonight, thank you very much, put in. One generous artist gentleman just down the valley lent $50,000, and we had a good bank manager who gave us a loan. But it was very slow and hard going, and it wasn't until we then bought the 8-hectare fan palm block at Daintree on the mainland that things seemed to move a little faster, and it just got its stride. And people have loved the idea of being able to invest in land that's going to, in perpetuity, be protected. And of course now there's this huge estate right across Australia, and a lot more that's being managed with the aid of bush heritage by the Indigenous people who so wonderfully still live on and manage their own land, principally in Northern Australia. Where's bush heritage going to go? I don't think we should ever limit the concept by the fact that, I don't know, Heather, 100 staff, some millions of dollars turnover each year, but if it was 10 times that size, with 10 times that turnover, we still wouldn't be doing much more than making a small impression on protecting this wonderful country, Australia, of ours, and its natural amenity, and its Indigenous history and heritage, which is so rapidly being lost under the impact of resource extraction economics in an age of consumerism. That applies to our seas as well, of course. So it's got a buoyant future in front of it, and it's only as good as the people who make it. And of course, the people have made it a wonderful organisation, one of the premier environmental organisations in the world. Think of that. Because people have cared, they've been so generous, they've put money, left it in their estates to bush heritage. Bush heritage has been able to buy, and of course then you have to manage land, and to very prudently look at where it might best invest that money into the future. But I like to see it as a private national park system, and I think with the state of politics at the moment, the bush heritage national park system, if you like, is safer than the public national park system in the hands of governments who are so readily opening the doors to private investors who want to change it, who want to have their own slice of profiting from it. Well, that's another debate, but thank goodness for bush heritage, and to you, Heather, and all your and Jody and all your staff, hats off. You do a wonderful job, and you've been true with the previous directors, CEOs, the wonderful boards and staff of the last 30 years, been true to the idea of ensuring that the money's wisely spent and that the land is properly looked after. I don't know, another 30 years' time, wouldn't it be wonderful if bush heritage was that much bigger and protecting that much more land? And as with Oura Oura, some of that we can't be trampling all over it, of course, but Oura Oura has been used to people, and it's been a farmed land, and it's one of the properties where everybody who invests, who needs a bit of foot on the ground of their own investment, who's invested in bush heritage, can go and sit by the river and think about what a wonderful world it is we live in.
Thank you, Bob. And I think, from my perspective with bush heritage, we know that there's so much work to do. And ourselves and other conservation organisations, supported by everybody that's on this call, all of our volunteers, all of our donors, our supporters, are making a real difference. And just to share a little thing from outside of Oura Oura, so other end of the country, but our Pullen Reserve became the first special wildlife reserve in Queensland, which gives it the same protection as a national park. It means it can't be mined, it can't be locked. So, we will continue to, strive forward and to build in that level of protection into the properties. And of course, it all started with Oura Oura. Now, just changing a tact a little bit, we've got a great question from Olivia, who lives in the inner urban Melbourne with a small garden. But she's been learning about Indigenous plants and bush foods and therefore trying to incorporate them into her garden. So she's just wondering about the bush foods at Oura Oura, and do you have any sort of planting plans or focus on natural propagation? So um, Bob, do you want to start that one? Then I might throw to Jody. But Bob, what are some of the bush foods that you've discovered over the years? And then we might throw to Jody as far as plans for developing that further or understanding it further.
Yes, thank you. I was telling friends the other day at Oura Oura about making a small jar of native raspberry jam up there. But I mustn't have boiled it long enough. And a few months later, when I got it out to have on toast for breakfast and just lifted the lid a little bit, the lid went off with a bang, hit the roof, and so did half the jam. It was a very powerful lot. And I, having been trained in the threat of botulinus from having jam that gets contaminated, I decided I wouldn't eat any of it. But much better than that, the native cherries are, of course, abundant on the hills around Oura Oura. There's cress in the river, and that's native cress, not introduced cress. That's very piquant to eat. And I'm sure there's a lot of other plants that are there if only we had the Indigenous knowledge to not just eat, but to apply for all sorts of medical eventualities if we wanted to. I haven't got any plans for
Jody?
planting.
Replace the daffodil patch, Bob, with some other natives around the cottage. We've got a really fantastic relationship with the Palia people, the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, and have spent a lot of time at Oura Oura with Hank and his family, among others, over the years. And we've undertaken a number of cultural heritage surveys with them across the reserves, both Oura Oura and the others, and have spent a lot of time walking the properties and exploring what's there and exploring their aspirations for the future on the properties, that can go from anything to how they would like to see their stories communicated through our interpretations, how they would like to protect particular sites that are important to them, how they'd like to be on country and engage just in their own way on country. We have a fantastic program once a year where Bracknell Primary School comes down and Hank and his family come and teach them all sorts of activities, including spear throwing, which presents us with a few challenges in terms of VOHS, but it's really fantastic seeing all of the children getting out and learning from Hank and the traditional owners there. And so, we're exploring all sorts of ideas and options for their aspirations for what they would like to see happen at those reserves, and working with them into the future on that. I've got no specific intel on bush food products, but certainly across the country, we're exploring those kinds of things on other reserves where the traditional owners are really particularly keen to develop bush food products. We're talking about yam daisies in some locations, grass seed production in other locations. So really exploring all of these ideas. There's amazing markets out there and a great opportunity for traditional owners to get back on country and reconnect with culture and country.
Thanks for that, Jody. And we've just got some people sharing through the chat line that there are some amazing plants across Australia, native plants, which have fantastic antibiotic properties, other medicinal properties. And, I've been lucky enough to be with traditional owners up south of Broome, learning about the different plants and medicinal properties. So this is a great opportunity with us, with the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, to really learn more and build up more of that bank of knowledge there at Oura Oura. Another question coming through, and it's a question we often get asked, and I think this one is for you, Jody, because it's a little bit of an interesting, challenging one. So Verity has asked, will we be able to visit and go into the house? We visited a while ago, we can only look through the windows. And I know we've had particular challenges with some not so nice individuals that have liked to break in and destroy some of the amazing stuff in the house. So Jody, do you just want to share the thoughts on that one at the moment?
Yeah, no worries. I guess at the moment, the cottage is still a working and used cottage, very much so. So, possibly at the invitation of Bob, if you happen to bump into him while he's there, you might get an invite. But no, at the moment, the cottage remains closed to the public. So if people are coming by, certainly they can come and have a look and walk around. One of the things that you've touched on there, Verity, with that is the interpretation of the cottage and how people can get a greater sense by walking around of what the history is and what's contained within. So we're doing a lot more around the storytelling around that. It may be one day in the future, but right now it's still not open to the public.
Thanks for that, Jody. But I would encourage people to, drop in, because you never know when you're going to drop in and see Bob and Paul. And they are absolutely fantastic hosts. Just be warned, Paul will probably put you to work, which is fantastic. He is a man on a mission when it comes to weeds and keeping the place spick and span. So I just might ask then a question, Bob. What is the weed that Paul hates the most? What's causing the most grief that we have to try and keep on top of down there at Aurora?
Curiously, well, the thistles, the usual run of thistles, but curiously enough, it's the buzzies which get in your socks, and they spread. They're natives. They're found in New Zealand as well as much of southern Australia, and they take quite a bit of keeping at bay, because they stick to everything, and it's very uncomfortable for people. They're coming to a seed at the moment. They're all over Tasmania. They're coming to a seed, and they stick in your socks, and they stick in your blanket, and they stick in your trouser legs, and and your shoes and your laces. But really, it's a place that looks after itself pretty well. It used to have a lot of ragwort. I used to spend 3 days a year just pulling ragwort. That's all gone. I think the willows are gone. The blackberries, we keep at bay. There's a working bee at Oura Oura, I think on Tuesday the 13th of December, where we'll be dealing with the foxgloves that come down the river from upstream, as well as the blackberries and a few other things. But it's a pretty good. It's a pretty good situation, but it does require, as with all land that's been deforested in Australia, it does require work each year to keep the weeds at bay.
Absolutely, and you made a good point there, Bob. So you made a good point there to encourage any locals to sign up to that volunteer working bee. We've had a couple of good turnouts recently, so it'd be great to get in there and get some more work done.
Oh, it's on the 15th, not the 13th, I'm told.
Thanks for that, and I'm sure we'll have some locals down there, and the rest of us will be there in spirit with you. Question that's come in is, and it's a question to all of us, thinking about climate change. I was wondering if each of us could give a recommendation on what book you think a climate skeptic should read to help bring them around to understanding.
Look, that's a very fine question, but I don't think, I think if there are climate skeptics, you're much better to get into action. It's largely a waste of time. Clive Hamilton's great book on climate change, I've seen some beauties very recently, and of course, for example, the Guardian newspaper keeps a watch on the latest in climate change. But I was at the 50th anniversary of my graduation from Sydney Medical School a couple of years back. 600 people there, and we were having a great night, and things got a bit quiet, and a gentleman came up and in a very loud voice started haranguing me about how I was wrong on climate change, and I should be reading the book of a very notable climate skeptic. And I said to him, I've got a better book at home at Liffey. It's on the shelf. And he said, what's that? And I said, Lunick's cartoons. They've got a greater grip on life than the writings of that climate skeptic. You know, I think if at this stage in our planet's change due to the climate emergency, there are people who still need to be convinced, leave them in their splendid denial and get on with taking action along with those people who do see that we have to change, and we have to change quickly. One of the
Thanks,
reasons,
Bob. Jody?
reasons I'm involved in, I just should add that one of the reasons that I'm involved with a campaign now to end the logging of Australian native forest right across this country is that's the quickest way of fixing carbon, stopping it being released into the atmosphere, and having a real impact on the parameters of the atmosphere which are leading to climate change. You know, at Liffey in 1976, at that pool under the bridge at Oura Oura had ice on it. You couldn't imagine it will ever have ice on it again in my lifetime or the lifetime of anybody watching this program, just because I measure the temperature of the water and it's going up, as is the temperature in the atmosphere. And regularly, I've got a thermometer there. You'll see the thermometer box as you're walking up towards the house, and regularly each year we're returning hotter temperatures. So a lot to do, but I love campaigning for those forests and their wildlife because besides the great balm for the soul of humanity that they represent and the strength of business, because Tasmania's got a huge job creation through tourism and hospitality, keeping them is a great hedge against climate change.
Yeah, thank you. Jody, any recommendation from you before we get on to a couple more questions?
Yeah, I've got an uncle that I've tried a few times to get over that skepticism with a number of books, and it has to be said that none of the books I've recommended have really worked. So clearly I'm reading the wrong things that a climate change skeptic isn't going to pick up on. The Weather Makers for me was a bit of a foundational one, but that's not going to get your skeptic over the line necessarily. I think the other thing is that I'm coming across more and more mainstream people in my work, farmers, people that run productive land right around Australia, that comment on what they're experiencing on the land, and that they may have previously not considered it real. And the narrative and the language is really important in that, but that they are experiencing changing climates and really feeling that and changing their views about that kind of thing. And I'm seeing that and having more and more of those conversations, and I'm hopeful about that. I think the other key books, would be, Bob, your books of inspiration and hope. For any skeptic, I think they're fantastic books to read to keep us going. And for those of us that aren't skeptic, they're fantastic to read when we've got those skeptics in our ears. So those are certainly good books to recommend.
Thanks, Jody. And just picking up that theme around, inspiration, one of the questions that's come through, Bob, is, obviously Aura is a place of inspiration. But what Julia is just asking, what are some of the other places that you find really inspiring?
Look, Paul and I, since I left the Senate in 2012, have travelled to many, and the big motivation was to see the bush heritage places that I'd never got to because it was such a demanding job. And those places were magnificent. Just before the webinar began tonight, I was thanking Jody for sending me a picture from Naree up near Hungerford and Northwest, out the back of Burke, and a coolabah tree that Paul and I sat under and had a picnic, and two old emus wandered past, is currently in a metre of water because of flood conditions, if you like, but just a gathering of the waters on that property seemed just incredible to see that beautiful big old tree having a dunk in cool water. To see the magnificent semi-tropical plants on the blocks in northwestern Australia, and then to go to the Shark Bay property and see the stromatolites, which produced oxygen, and without 2 or 3 billion years ago, and without them, we simply wouldn't exist. They're not stunning to look at, but they are absolutely mind-bending when you consider what they've done for us and for this planet. And I think that anywhere you go into the bush can be inspiring. But I might end up by saying, if you want 10 days that you'll never forget, book yourself a trip and float down the Franklin River. It's a stunner. They're making a film of the Franklin campaign at the moment. Oliver Cassidy and friends, they interviewed me at Oura Oura about this. I think they're just coming off the river now, and that's something to look forward to. But don't think you can't do it. These days, the big rafts, the wonderful cuisine, the guides who know every rock and log in that river, and I practiced for our first trip down there on the Liffey at Oura Oura. My recommendation is chance it. Have a go at the Franklin. You'll love it.
Thanks, Bob. And you've now just added an extra trip to my list. So thank you so much for that. Really look forward to doing that. We've got one last question, which I'm going to throw to Jody because we're slightly over time and we recognise that people will need to go to their other commitments. So we might finish up on this question, Jody, and then I'll throw to you, Bob, for some final reflections. But Jody, given the times that you've been at Oura, what are some of those sort of everyday moments of the times that you've been there that sort of just bring you joy when you're there, or the times you've been there with the family?
Thank you. I have many. Probably one of the more recent ones was actually getting quite active with the team. I was like, it was actually on our trip in January. There were two things. One was probably what you wouldn't think would bring you joy, but I was out with our ecologist, our safety manager, and a number of volunteers, Sarah, and a few others, and a couple of our children. And what brought me joy was getting my children pulling foxgloves out of the ground at Liffey River Reserves. It was part of the joy possibly was seeing them do some real good hard work, but it was just fantastic feeling like that we were all contributing to improving the environment on that day, in this beautiful location, walking around, having other people with other experiences, ecologists, partnerships officers, sharing their stories with my children and a few other children that were there was really, really special. On that same day, being back at Oura, sitting around the campfire, Bob with yourself and Paul, and we were having some fantastic conversations about the future and all that it could be. And at the same time, my children were over having this amazing experience with an echidna burrowing its little nose into the dirt. And those experiences of watching the younger generations learning and getting inspired and getting actively engaged in these kinds of things is what has brought me joy, and learning from my colleagues. I'm constantly learning new things about places that I go, from my staff, from my colleagues, and from our partners, and that's a real privilege.
Thanks, Jody. Before I pass to Bob for some final words, I'd just like to mention that this has been recorded this evening and it will be emailed to everybody. So I'd encourage you to share it with your friends, get others inspired about going down to Tasmania and going to this amazing place of inspiration. But Bob, just as we wrap up and we finish up, any final words or messages for everybody that's been part of this webinar this evening?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just 2 days ago at this time, I was in the headwaters of the Liffey River up on Projection Bluff, and a thunderstorm was rolling over, and the waratahs were out, and the scaparia, this wonderful Tasmanian plant, is coming out into its orange flowers. And I was thinking about the river making its way down over the falls and down past Oura Oura, and what a beautiful setup the whole valley is. There's so much to see there. So it is a very special place for me, but I'm getting to the end of my lifetime, and I get a huge kick out of thinking there'll be other people, getting enjoyment out of this place in the years, maybe hopefully the centuries to come, because it is a work of nature. It is a brilliant piece of nature in the Liffey Valley, with a great bluff up on behind, and that little house, that's a work of Elizabeth and Charles Crack, sitting there on the clearing underneath it. Great fortune that it's there still. Thank you, Bush Heritage. Thank you, Heather and everybody. It's great that Paul and I can still stay there at times. I do writing there. I've got a little book called Thera coming out shortly, hopefully, which completed the other week sitting up there. Come on down. If you see a little bit of smoke coming out the chimney, or the blinds are fully up, that means we're home. Knock on the door, and we'll certainly show you. You can see everything in the house just by looking in the windows. Such a tiny house. And I hope that you will be able to get there on a beautiful day. And I'd love to see you there and just talk to you about, again, as I said earlier, what a beautiful world that we live in, and what a great job Bush Heritage is doing, helping look after it so that people can enjoy it into the future.